how's it going? As some of you probably know, Arc is incredibly strong this season, thanks to a few buffs received in Season 21, and the artifact mods, which increase its potency further. Specifically, Arc Warlock is very strong, and is currently one of the most underrated subclasses in the game. This is the class I use to solo flawless the entirety of Ghosts of the Deep, because I really do believe that this is one of the better Warlock subclasses to use right now. In this video, I want to explore some of the choices for this subclass because there are different things you can do with Arc Warlock for different situations. So first, in case some people missed it, Chaos Reach and Storm Trance both got their own buffs in Season 21, resulting in 25% more damage against PvE enemies. Both of these got further buffs, but Chaos Reach also now jolts targets on sustained damage, which will further increase the damage for you and your fire team. I think this buff, both paired with Arc Souls, which already do a lot of damage, now makes this class extremely viable for both ad clear and single target damage. But it actually doesn't stop there for the super, thanks to this season's artifact mods. Thunderous Retort grants bonus arc super damage if cast while critically wounded or while amplified. Lasts until the end of the super activation. This artifact mod is a 30% damage buff on every arc super, including Chaos Reach, which already got a 25% damage buff and applies Jolt as well. If you pair this with GEOMAG stabilizers, which is one of the many things you can do with Arc Warlock, you can apply a ton of damage with only your super for a long period of time. And being amplified on Warlock is something that can be done very easily, thanks to the aspect Electrostatic Mind. Defeating targets with Arc abilities or defeating blinded or jolted targets will create Ionic Traces, and Ionic Traces make you amplified. This one aspect pretty much allows you to always be amplified, because you can constantly make Ionic Traces with this build. Everything you do will make Ionic Traces, including every single Arc Soul kill, which you'll be using a lot in this build. If you pair this with a Jolt Shot weapon, you'll also jolt targets with your primary weapons, which will also make Ionic Traces, so you don't even need abilities to be amplified. The only problem is currently getting a Jolt Shot weapon is a little difficult. The best Jolt Shot weapon in the game currently is a crafted Ikelos SMG. The only way to get this in the game is to hope one drops from world activities. If you have the season pass, I would strongly recommend using your Deep Sight Harmonizer for the pattern. It's well worth it if you plan on using Arc, and it's also a very good general weapon. Some other substitutes are the Dark Decider Auto Rifle from Iron Banner or the Neomuna Pulse Rifle can also get full shot. Both the Last Wish and Beyond Light raids have hand cannons that can drop with Volt Shot, so that's an option if you like to raid. If you really don't have access to Volt Shot, thankfully, it's not that important this season, thanks to the artifact mod, Shock and Awe. Arc Final Blows, while amplified, summons a burst of lightning that jolts targets, so this is a way for any Arc weapon to jolt targets, and those will create Ionic Traces. So that's a good substitute if you don't have Volt Shot, but I would definitely try to get one before the season ends. It's also worth mentioning that there are special ammo exotics that create Ionic Traces for free, so these are options too. COLDHEART is the best option, since it's also associated with a Overload Champion mod this season. This will create Ionic Traces on sustained damage, so you can absolutely use this if you find yourself in a situation where you really need to be amplified. Okay, so let's talk about some exotic pieces of armor that you can use. The best exotic to run with Arc Warlock is Fallen SUNSTAR. This will grant you increased ability energy every time you collect an Ionic Trace, which again, you're constantly doing with Arc Warlock. This exotic enables Arc Warlock to be the most ability spammy subclass in the game. If used right, you will never run out of abilities to use, and if you ever do run out of abilities, you can use your Volt Shot weapon to create more Ionic Traces, which are buffed by Fallen SUNSTAR. This is definitely the best general exotic to use, meaning it's good for almost every activity, from strikes to raids or dungeons. It's very powerful. The only problem is you need Witch Queen to actually get this to drop. So a good substitute is Crown of Tempest. This will give you increased ability energy for every Arc ability or jolted final blow, and also extend Storm Trance if you decided to use that instead. Both of these basically do around the same thing, but Fallen SUNSTAR also gives your teammates ability energy, so it's a little bit better for that reason. That being said, it's a very good exotic for free-to-play players or people who don't have Witch Queen. Now for the fragments you want to be using, Spark of Ions, defeating a jolted target creates an ionic trace. This actually stacks with Electrostatic Mine's aspect, meaning you'll create 2 ionic traces when you defeat jolted targets. This is very good for keeping your ability energy always up. Spark of Shock, your arc grenades jolt targets. Pair this with a pulse grenade for one of the most powerful grenades in the entire game. Spark of Discharge, arc weapon final blows have a chance to create ionic traces. So while it's guaranteed on a volt shot weapon, you'll also have a chance to further create additional ones. These 3 fragments are necessary for almost every arc build in the game, while the 4th being a little bit more optional depending on what you want to run. I personally like Spark of Instinct, which will jolt targets around you when you're critically wounded, but there's a lot of good options here, and we'll get to that in a bit. Obviously, you want to run Electrostatic Mind, which is what causes you to create so many ionic traces, and you definitely want Arc Souls. Casting your Rift will create an Arc Soul for you and your allies, while amplified, your Arc Souls are supercharged and gain increased rate of fire. This is the primary source of your ability kills. While supercharged, Arc Souls are incredibly busted, and each time they defeat an enemy, they will create an ionic trace, which will further increase their damage. This is what makes Arc Warlock so special. Having a little helper next to you to create ionic traces for you at all times is a really handy thing to have. The build you're seeing is incredibly viable in all activities. I've personally used this to solo dungeons, to complete master raids and grand masters, and I strongly recommend you try it out for yourself. So there's one more exotic I'd like to talk about for this build. That exotic is the Stag. Your Rift provides damage reduction to allied guardians standing in it. Grants Rift energy when you are critically wounded. This is actually the exotic I used to solo Flawless Ghosts of the Deep. And if you want to check out the full run, the video is in the description. Now I want to be clear here, the Stag is good, but it is specifically good for Ghosts of the Deep. Because of the ad density and how you're constantly surrounded by ads, the Stag is really nice here. Standing in your Rift will give you a 25% damage reduction, and you can further that buff with the artifact mod Amped Up. Gain damage resistance while amplified. This is also a 25% damage buff. And again, because of how many ads there are in Ghosts of the Deep, there's also Spark of Resistance, which will give you a 40% damage reduction that stacks with all of these choices. So all 3 of these together ensure you won't die in your Rift. And thanks to all the ionic traces you naturally make, you should always have a Rift when you need it. So while this is a good exotic, I would not recommend using the Stag in general gameplay. Usually that much damage resistance is not needed. You can try to use this in Grandmasters or Master Raids if you're struggling to stay alive, but usually Fallen Sunstar is the best choice. So overall, I would definitely make a build with Fallen Sunstar, and I would make a build using the Stag if you plan on trying a solo Flawless. Let me know if you like the build and the video, subscribe if you like this content, and have a good one.